See, violence shadowed our language, and our lines tagged the streets. Our tongues were so soaked in our defences we hoped only to outlast the day. Just look at how we spoke to one another. Ennet though, my man and pussyo. Our friendships we called bloods, and our homes we called our ends. We revelled in throwing crafted curses at our mothers and receiving hard slaps to heads. Our combs cut lines in our hair, and we scarred our eyebrows with blades. We became warrior tribes of man-nem, slave kings, and palm-swiping cubs we were. Our parents knew nothing, and most others only knew us from the noise we made at the back of the buses.
Thank you so much. That was multi-award-winning novelist Guy Gunaratne reading from his stunning debut in A Mad and Furious City. It's been called the London Book of Our Lifetime. Guy, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Now, A Mad and Furious City unfolds over 48 hours during a summer of unrest. It begins when an off-duty soldier is murdered by a black man on a London council estate, an echo of the murder of the soldier Lee Rigby in 2013. Now, at the start of the book, you write, he called himself the Hand of Allah, but to us, he looked as if he'd just rolled out of the same school gates as us. He had the same trainers we wore, spoke the same road slang we used. The blood was not what shocked us. For us, it was his face like a mirror, reflecting our own confused and frightened thoughts. How closely does this reflect your own feelings about the Lee Rigby murder when you watched it?
I think quite directly when that incident happened. I don't know if it made the news here, but the video that came out of the killing, some brave woman walked up to one of the killers, Michael Adebolajo, and actually asked him why he'd just done what he'd just done, and said the usual thing. And the video, that Michael Adebolajo did grow up in London like me, was radicalised, converted, and was radicalised, and that disturbing recognition I had in terms of the clothes he wore, the way he carried himself. The line in the book is, terrorism never felt so close. And I don't know if any artist can choose what they're compelled by in terms of what they want to write and want to explore, but there was something there in terms of how I felt, the recognition somehow that led me to write the book.
And one of the most striking elements of the book is the command of voice. Most of the novel is written in first-person patois, which you called road dialect, through 5 different characters' voices. Why was it important for you to write the book with this dialect?
Well, London's always been about language to me. So when I was growing up, like the kind of sort of dialect I grew up with and spoke like as a young person in London, anyone who has been to London recently and has been on a London bus with like a lot of teenage kids have heard this dialect. What was fascinating about it was just kind of the awareness that the words I used were sort of inherited from the different cultures and through the waves of immigration. So you'd speak with sort of West Indian patois mixed with some Bengali slang and some sort of Irish dialect also just mingled in there. And that to me was just so fascinating, just as a language geek. Like, it was kind of fun to play with that and also use it as perhaps a commentary about how sometimes through language we also inherit our social conditioning as well. So there's a level to this book where you can read it as sort of the inheritance of language.
Okay, well, the book has just come out in France, and we spoke to the person who actually translated it, Laurent Trèves. He explained how he kept the authenticity of the voices in the French text.
There are different characters from Pakistan, to say it quickly, from Ireland, some that were born in London but who have Caribbean-born parents, etc. So the question was, how do I make sure that these specificities are understood, but without transforming them into French archetypes? What I did was that I decided to keep some English words as such, to include them within the French text, so that a French reader would see that each character has his or her own specificities.
So, Guy, you actually grew up, as you said, in Neasden, in northwest London, where this book is set, but you don't speak the dialect of the book, do you?
I mean, I still do when I speak to my friends back home. But it's always been I think it's inherent to sort of any immigrant experience, being able to code switch in certain situations. And being sort of made of many seems more natural to me than anything else. Writing this way makes sense to me. But I don't know. To me, it feels like a superpower to be able to kind of mold the way I express myself in different places. It's a good thing.
And the 5 characters in the book are migrants or second-generation migrants, 3 young men who live against this backdrop of violence, of gangs, but also radicalised Muslim groups. There's also 2 older characters, Caroline, who's from Northern Ireland and grew up during the Troubles, and West Indian Nelson, who came to the UK during the 1950s. Now, they seem to represent all these different waves of migration that we've seen in the UK. Nelson talks of a sort of deep-down shame when I realised that this Britain here did not love me back, no matter how I feel for it. Do you feel like the older generations accepted the prejudices against them more than the younger generations do today?
It might be. It's difficult to sort of speak on behalf of entire generations, but it has been something that's come up with conversations with my dad and people of that generation. And I know for a fact that my own generation and those coming up now, that they're less accommodating to certain violences, certain prejudices now. But that's not to say that suddenly we feel like we've claimed sort of a British identity. It's still in flux. But for me, as a writer, as any artist, I think it's more interesting that way, being able to speak from the spaces in between, because you're not sort of beholden to a certain flag or a certain group of people or some sort of nationhood. It's an interesting place to be because you get to write about that space, and how dislocation sometimes is the more interesting question. It's the more interesting space to explore.
And there's this sense of violence all the way throughout the book, or this impending threat of violence. Do you think that violence is an unavoidable consequence of today's politics?
Well, if you have a racist clown as a prime minister, I think that if the language in politics is excited by provocation, I think that does come through the language in terms of how you speak about belonging. And sometimes in that violence, there's a certain space that you can create art from. I'm certainly grateful, I think, for some of the difficult situations that I grew up in. I thought many artists that come from that kind of environment would say the same.
Which brings me to the music in the book. Your growing up coincided with the rise of grime music. In the book you write, I got lethal beat, got jam, a bit of Wiley, bit of bashy. Lots of people watching won't actually know what grime music is, so I want to play them the best example of British grime at the moment. This is Do Better from the latest album from Stormzy, Heavy is the Head.
Have you ever had to sacrifice your health? Ever had to sacrifice yourself? Plus I got an army full of dickheads trying to sabotage my wealth. But I know it's self-destructive if I bang him on myself. Wow, like God hold me down till I'm bound. God hold me down till I drown. Hold me down till I drown. It's like I nearly fell into the ground, but the holy blood of Christ, you don't ever let me down. Lord knows I could pack up in minutes and disappear. Wonder if I float with my man and just disappear. Number 17.
Guy, tell us, why did you want to put grime music at the heart of the novel?
I don't think you could write about London today without mentioning grime. It's so much part of the rhythm of the place. It certainly it feels, grime music feels like it's it plays to the rhythm of the city. Anytime anyone asks me where they should go and how you go to experience London, I always tell them 2 things. I tell them to try and experience it in motion, so get on a bus or drive through the city, be moving. That's the best way to experience what it's like to live there. But also the music is so typical of that place. It's there's a lot of friction in the music in terms of the lyrics, but also
between the
beats.
artists.
Yeah, absolutely. Between yeah, currently for sure. But again, it's almost a reclamation of a place. That's what grime music is to me. It's sort of defiance.
And since you wrote the book, you've become a dad, and now you live between Sweden and the UK, in Malmo and in Cambridge. You're writing your second novel. Can I ask you, where is it set?
I'm always really hesitant to talk about what I'm currently writing, only because it becomes less interesting when I go back to my desk. There's a danger of speaking away a novel as you're writing it. So I'm just not gonna answer.
Okay, well, we always end the show with our guests' cultural pick of the moment. What have you chosen for us?
I've chosen an album that's coming out on the 17th, I think, from the band Algiers, and I picked it only because there's a video that they released from their upcoming album called Dispossession. I think you're going to play it, but like it's set in parts of Paris, like the Jardin d'Agronomie Tropicale, for example, and places like Noisy. The Jardin d'Agronomie Tropicale, you have monuments to sort of past empire, and we have monuments like that in London. We have like statues of despicable men everywhere, and people walk through, and you're reminded of the violence that used to be part of being part of the nation, and the violences that are currently being pushed on people. So for me, the art of Algiers, the music of Algiers, typifies that. It's the sound of defiance.
Okay. Guy, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Guy Gunaratne, your book, In Our Mad and Furious City, is available in French and English now. We're going to play out with Algiers' Dispossession, filmed around Paris. You can watch our recent interview with the group on our website, france24.com. We're also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.